right. Clap once if you can hear me. Clap twice if you can hear me. Okay, great, it works. Haven't done that in ages. It feels good to do that again. Hello and welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming to this session. Hopefully you're here to talk about coding exercises. I'm Matt Decuir, and I'm legitimately jazzed to be here today. Minibar is one of my favorite days of the entire year. Not just my favorite event, but my favorite day. And having not done this for a couple years, it feels good to be back. And with that, I think we'll just get started. If you're coming in, there's some seats over here. Feel free to walk through and disrupt people's view. They're not missing much. Come on in, everybody. Okay, we got a good group. This is fantastic. Okay, so sort of like a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. We're talking about coding exercises, so hopefully that's what you're here to talk about and hear about today. There's some more seats. Come on in, folks. Feel free to get close and cozy. Nobody bites, I don't think. Perfect. Okay, so we're talking about coding exercises. We're going to talk a little bit about whether or not they're necessary. We'll talk about what makes for a good one, what makes for a bad one. I threw out a survey, and we have some preliminary survey results about coding exercises too. And there's going to be a lot of time left for open discussion and Q&A towards the end. So save those hot takes till the end. And I guess, with this being an unconference, the law of 2 feet, if this isn't a session for you, feel free to walk out. You're not going to offend me or anybody else. Go find something that's more interesting. That's totally fine. We don't need that yet.
I know. We're talking in the microphone when you want to say something, so it gets on the recording.
Yeah. This is being recorded through the mic that's right here, connected to my shirt. When we do open discussion, we're going to use the microphone, both for everybody in the room to hear and hopefully for the ambient stuff to get picked up too. And Seth has volunteered as my helper, so thank you so much, Seth. Appreciate you. Okay, so who's in the room? Just by a show of hands, how many of you have taken a coding exercise before? Okay, most of the people here. Great. How many of you have administered them like you were an interviewer? Okay, a good number. And then lastly, how many of you identify as hiring managers and you've used coding exercises to sort of make hiring decisions? Okay, fewer. Great. Okay, that aligns exactly with what I was expecting. For those of you who just came in, there's a couple more seats over here. If you want to grab a spot so you're not leaning awkwardly against the wall or sitting on the floor. Yeah, if you got a seat by you, raise your hand. That's awesome. Thank you. So just to make sure that the definition about what we mean when we say coding exercise is abundantly clear, we're talking about technical assessments in the developer hiring process. So that's sort of to put it overwhelmingly clearly to make sure that we're all on the same page. And the reason why we're talking about them is because I think of them kind of like resumes. Like when you're going through a job search, when you're interviewing, it's a crappy but necessary step in the process that you're going to experience, sort of whether you like it or not. And just to make this also abundantly clear, I am not an expert. I have probably more questions than answers about coding exercises, which is why most of the session is going to be geared towards us all in the room talking about it together. I personally have feelings. I've taken them. I've administered them. I've had good experiences. I've had bad ones. And I think this is a sort of topic that I'm passionate about, and I've been wanting to have a mini bar session about this for years, and here we are. We finally have the opportunity. So general sentiment, just based on the limited research that I've been doing, for candidates, coding exercises generally is they're poor experiences. For employers, what's interesting is that it's a polarizing topic. Some employers I've talked to are like, hold on, we don't even believe in coding exercises. And others I got an email from a local founder the other day who sent me a very long email. And this is somebody who never sends emails saying here's why we do coding exercises, here's why they're important, here's why they're valuable. And just seeing that, there are some people on one end of the spectrum and other people on the other, there's general, nobody agrees on this. And that's why we're all here. So I want to plant the seed of a question, sort of, are coding exercises actually necessary? And this is not a question that I'm not gonna give you an answer to this. I don't have one, but it's just something for you to sort of think about. And when we get to our open discussion, maybe we'll talk about this a little bit more. So the sort of quick, like high-level case for coding exercises, you want to avoid making a bad hire. At least employers want to avoid making bad hires. And like the way I'm phrasing that is deliberate, because it's not so much as like ensuring that you make a good hire, it's you want to avoid the negative downside of hiring somebody and then having to sort of correct that decision later down the road, because it's very expensive, to go through the interviewing process, the hiring process, to onboard somebody, to get them up to speed, and then you realize sort of, oh crap, this person isn't actually a fit. And it's almost like it's more defensive than offensive. It's like, so that's, I don't know, that's the thing that I think I've heard a good number of times from employers is you're trying to avoid the bad thing happening. Theoretically, employers are able to assess for technical abilities and problem-solving skills, general sort of attitude and demeanor. Theoretically, it gives candidates opportunities to demonstrate their skills, and I think depending on the experience level of whoever's coming in, this is probably more applicable for junior folks who are sort of earlier career, whereas if you're a senior person who's been working in software for many years, you're probably like, why are you making me do this? Like, I have code that you can look at that's already out there in the world. And I guess when they're done well, it can be a really positive experience on both sides. So whether you get rejected or not, like if you get rejected and you get really good critical feedback, that ends up being like a net positive. And also, I mean, if you get the job, like presumably that's a positive too. The case against coding exercises. So this is where, I mean, there's a huge burden that's unnecessarily thrust upon job seekers. That's sort of generally what I've personally experienced, and also what I've heard from a number of people as well. And I mean, employers are filtering out candidates, whether good or bad, and in some or many cases, they might be filtering out candidates that are actually going to be a great fit. There's subconscious bias and sort of inequity that's sort of rolled into this as well, that if you're really not careful and thoughtful, your coding exercise can codify that. And then when they're done poorly, it's kind of bad for everybody. Like I'm sure, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I'm sure some of you have like really bad coding exercise experiences where it just left a bad taste in your mouth. So what makes a coding exercise good or bad? This is just a loaded question. But some of the things that I've seen is like a laborious take-home exercise that takes a long time, especially if candidates aren't paid for the time. That's not great. And then a general theme that I've seen too is that like if problems aren't reflective of the work, that can lead to a bad experience. Trick questions and also algorithms as a buzzword, those are things that people have a lot of feelings about, mostly negative, I would say. And another example, just like problems that are reflective of the work, like how often are you spinning up an app from scratch at work? Like, does doing a coding exercise where you spin up an app from scratch, is that actually reflective of the job that you're going to be doing on a regular basis? Like working off of an existing repo and adding some incremental functionality is probably a better way to do it. And then communication about expectations. This is another biggie, like how long it's going to take, what you're being assessed for, whether you expect it to finish or not, and also sort of general communication about the problem. Like if you're the person writing and administering the test, it's all probably clear in your head what you want them to do, but you've got to put that to paper, you got to send it to them, they've got to like read and interpret and understand that, and actually take it and run with it. So what makes for a good coding exercise? This is again very subjective, but one of the things that I've seen in talking to many people is that everybody has a different opinion and everybody has different preferences. And so giving candidates multiple options, for example, you could have a take-home exercise, you could do a live pairing exercise, or you could submit something that you already wrote. And I feel like if you give candidates those three options, they're going to be able to choose what's best for them and their personal preferences and situation. And so I really like that as just a choice. We talked about problems already, just making sure that they're related to the actual job. Candidates hopefully are able to demonstrate their problem-solving process and like how they're thinking about the problem. And I have examples from prior jobs where we exclusively hired junior and we did live pairing exercises. And as a result of the live pairing exercise, you could have them speak to how they're thinking about the problem. Like the actual code that they write is less important than how they think about and how they approach the problem. Clear communications, clear communication about expectations. That's sort of an overwhelmingly sort of obvious thing that frequently gets done wrong. This one definitely feeds into sort of bias and equity, making sure that you have consistent and impartial scoring. And then lastly, an opportunity to talk through your code, whether it's a live code review after the fact, and or if nothing else, giving feedback about, like positive or negative about sort of, whatever the work that you just had a candidate go through. So okay, we're going to nerd out for just a minute. These are preliminary results. They're not official. At some point, I'll write a blog post, and that'll be live on the Invisible Network blog. But I want to share sort of some of the high-level takeaways. And the survey was focused specifically on candidate preferences. So we're not asking employers for their feelings. We're asking just for candidates sort of how you feel about it. And so I was surprised about this because I personally, I don't know if that's my preference, but take home was a preference to live coding exercises. It was about 2 to 1. This one is sort of interesting because we asked about sort of what length of exercise you would be most comfortable taking for in-person or for a live exercise or for a take home, and that live exercises were almost always, the preference was always shorter than the take home, which makes sense because you're doing it on your own time. You hopefully you have a little bit more of a buffer. You can be more relaxed about it. You're not on the spot. You don't have somebody breathing down your neck. Timed versus untimed, that's a mixed result, so that's hopefully something that's going to come up in discussion later. I would love to hear your feelings about the merits of both. Problems related to the job, that was an overwhelming majority preference that the work that you're being tested on is reflective of the work that you would be doing, just kind of makes sense. Whether or not feedback should be shared, that was also a strong positive, a strong yes. About 80% of people said yes, 18% said it depends, and those it depends were like, if the candidate asks for feedback, we'll give it. And to which I would ask you, I would say, why don't you just make it the default? Why don't you just do it by default anyway? Whether or not candidates should be paid is another hot button mixed topic. And then lastly, whether or not you should assess juniors differently than seniors or more experienced folks, that was also a strong positive thing. And this is like the summary here is these are preliminary. I saw you all taking pictures. They'll change as we get more results. Hopefully, if you all fill out the survey, you're not skewed by seeing some of the results already. But with all of that shared, you can take the survey if you'd like. You don't have to do it right now, and I'll share the link again later. So if you want to take a screenshot, that's cool. If not, you can see it all later too. I'll tweet out a link to it, so there'll be a lot of ways for you to fill out the survey if you'd like. But also, I appreciate you giving me your full attention right now. And so now that I've shared all that, we're going to get into the open discussion. And so this is where I always run out of time because we go up to the last minute. So I want to make sure that the links are clear, just so you know, like if this is a topic that you want to continue paying attention to and you're passionate about, we have some upcoming mini AMA panel discussions. One will be in July, and that'll be focused on employers, and then one will be in August, and that will be focused on job seekers. And these have been virtual events, so you could join from anywhere. You don't have to be here in person. The survey, I got a short URL here, tinyurl.com/coding exercises. And then just for more information about me, I'm Experiment on Twitter, and I run Invisible Network, which is an anonymous job matching service that's focused specifically on connecting developers with companies that are hiring. So now that I've got that out of the way, this is your time. So there are a lot of topics here. I'm sure that you all have sort of spurred. Hopefully, my slides have spurred some ideas or some things you want to share. Okay, there you are. Seth has got the mic. So raise your hand if you want to, sort of shout something out. We're sort of just this is gonna be an open thing. I know it's awkward to be the first person to talk, but if you want to say something, sort of raise your hand and we'll get into it.
Are we unmuted?
Oh. Try it out. Cool.
That's good.
This is actually another amount I can't tell because I've got that next to me too. But just while we were going over this, it reminded me of previously before I was in tech, I was a teacher. And every single time I look at a coding exercise, you can tell pretty fast whether or not it's a standard one that they just pulled from somewhere or whether or not it's specific to the job. And it's very similar to any test you've taken in school. If you're taking a test at the end of a unit and you've had that time to study and to learn and it's on something specific, say like a job, you feel like you actually have valid answers to it. You feel like you've gotten something out of it and you feel like you're prepared for it. Whereas standardized testing, which honestly not a lot of teachers like, just as much as kids usually don't like to, it doesn't actually, a lot of the times, show what you know. It shows what you know at that exact moment, kind of thing. So you don't actually have any of that preparedness for it. It's kind of more, are you good at taking tests, in a sense. And so whenever I see coding exercises that are more just standard, not specific to a job, it just feels like, am I good at taking a test? Whereas if it's something like, oh, this is specific to the job, we're going to give you time to actually take a look at it, maybe you can take it home, or we'll tell you what it's going to be about in advance, then you can show, like, this is what I actually know, in a sense. So
Yeah.
that's my hot take on that.
That's a good hot take. So, I mean, it sounds like you're saying that when it feels like a standardized test where you're memorizing stuff, that doesn't feel as good as when you're given opportunities to sort of show your knowledge and how you think. Yeah.
Or like the end of the year, the ones that kids take every single year where it's just like a bunch of questions. Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot more gotcha questions on standardized tests than there are at like the end of, say, like a history unit in class or something. You
Yeah.
actually know what you're going in there and what you need to show you know.
Yeah, totally. I see some hands. Kristen was over here. We're gonna give you a workout, Seth.
Well, I appreciated that comment, and I'd like to expand on it because I've had this experience recently doing some coding tests and also doing some work with others who are developers at my level or higher. It's interesting when you get a standard test because working with people you think, oh, well, it looks like they can pass this standard test, but then you sit down and you're actually like looking at code and they can't reason through a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So if they smash their way through that standard test, like, wow, they look like they know what they're doing, and somebody like me, I benefit from pairing because I can tell the person and they can see my thought process. Fast forward, now you're in this job and there's a bunch of people who are really smart, but they're real hard to work with because you can't discuss things with them, you're not learning and growing from them, and or they can't show you their problem solving process, the answer just appears, or it ends up being the incorrect answer at some point, all because you can just do these quick, like I can throw a loop in here, or I know how to, traverse a binary tree, all those sorts of things. So to me, I don't want to say it's a lazy way, but sometimes it seems like the lazy way to find people. You really want to be able to know their thought process and how they mesh in with the people that they be with, especially in terms of a hiring decision.
Yeah. So to pair it back, what you just said is like collaboration is an important part of any job, and just taking a standardized test doesn't give you an opportunity to sort of show how you work with others. Makes sense. What we got?
You call.
I saw you in the back over there. Put your hand up. And then you're over here, you're going to be next.
First of all, I think this is a great topic for the discussion. I want to talk a little bit about reducing bias in the process. I am a hiring manager, and sometimes, and this is live feedback that I got from somebody who went through a pretty bad coding exercise. The interviewer gave this person a problem to solve that was based on a deck of playing cards. You would think that that should be okay, but it just so happened that the candidate has never played cards. They just have not had exposure to a deck of cards, right? And so and they were super nervous because they hadn't interviewed in a while. And so now you're putting this unfamiliar situation in front of a candidate and sort of just assuming that they know, because everybody knows, right? I mean, so this is the kind of bias that even setting aside gender and other types of biases, even something as simple as this can creep into the interviewing process, and you could lose out on a great candidate. So I would say, as interviewers, if all of you are interviewing, please check in with your candidate, put them at ease. You can ask the first few questions to kind of get them started. Don't just sit back and expect them to ask you these basic questions, because at the end of the day, you're there to help them succeed and figure out if you're a mutual fit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's interesting because bias can surface in many ways, but lived experience bias. You're making assumptions about what somebody knows about. And I feel like another aspect of what you just mentioned is giving candidates opportunities to ask questions, whether it's a take-home exercise or a live one. If you just send something via email and you throw it over the wall and you just assume that they're gonna know what it means and everything, that's not great. I feel like there are other aspects about bias in the process too. I feel like the thing that comes immediately to mind is if you're forcing somebody to do like a long take-home exercise, that you don't know what their circumstances are outside of work, whether they can make the time for spending 10 hours on an exercise over a weekend or something. That to me feels like one of the other sort of good examples that I've heard of, and I'm curious, what other examples and also like ways to combat that have you all heard of? I know you're next over here. I don't know if you're talking about coding about bias, but.
Yeah, I can touch on that, I guess. Yeah, I'm Matt. I'm a software engineering manager at Meta. No surprise, we do a lot of standard coding exercises. Not giving away any secrets there. The way I think about it is it's part of a holistic process in hiring. It's going to give some useful signal and some noise or useless signal. It's important to know how it fits in amongst the other things you're doing as part of that process. So are you looking also at how they design and architect things, how they interact, and how they think? So it's going to give you a narrow slice, and it's important just to think about what you're getting and also what you're not getting.
Yeah.
And then think about how it also fits in with where the company is going and what the company really values in the people that work there. So yes, there can be good and can be bad. It's just like a tool in a toolbox. If all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. But if you have a whole suite of tools and you understand how to use them, I think then it can be appropriate. It's just important to be really mindful of how to do that. To touch on the point of bias, again, some of these standard questions, they're out there, and so people have a chance, regardless of background, because they are relatively publicly available. I think it has a way for people to reduce bias. So if you know you're going to interview an employer that does these sorts of things, you can go get access to those questions ahead of time. Yes, it has other problems, like are you going to spend time studying, and then back to the point about standardized testing. But it does help to reduce some of that bias, as well as having people internally that look at the pool of questions that are being used from a lens of bias. So anyways, my two cents on all this.
That's great, thank you. I mean, I heard of another local company that they have candidates do coding exercises and then they assess them blind. So they're completely unpaired from the actual candidate, no names, no photos, no any of that. And so they're just looking at the merits of the code, which I think is another good way to approach it, one of many. Hands? Here you go. You're next. Liz, you're next after that.
This is more question than answer, something I'm looking for from other people. My employer switched from take-home case studies to live pairing exercises. And kind of the rationale was it lengthens the hiring process, and oftentimes, because candidates kind of don't understand the problem where it would exist in a larger context in the actual job, they might go off in a really weird direction. However, with the live programming exercises, that allows you to actually kind of get feedback during the process. So a lot of these projects in our work hinges on open source. And you may have, no one person can know, the full ecosystem of libraries. So it's a very, very different thing to say to the person who's evaluating you, hey, do you guys have a library for a hash map that does this? And then be able to go, oh yeah, here's a library, and to go and import it and actually perform the work. But I had a really bad experience in my own hiring process recently where I basically went in blind, and the problem was a toy problem. I was interviewing for lead and doing a file I/O instead of actual databases. It was really hard to talk about what I actually know. So I'm wondering if folks have ideas for what can kind of help the mechanics of that, and that's something I could take back.
Okay, I feel like there are many layers to what you just said, but one of them is live versus take home, and then one of them is how do you sort of give candidates opportunities to show real world job experience, and also like both their past experience and also what they would be doing on the job. File I/O versus databases, I feel like that's tricky because it's like you're decreasing the scope of things a lot by making it be a file I/O thing, but working with the database is an important part of it, of a lot of jobs. I don't know. Does anybody have any sort of off-the-cuff answers to his question? Cool. Sorry, Liz, you're next after this.
So I'm Ross Lizer, I'm an educator, and one of the things that I have to do is assess. And I'm thinking about bias and inclusivity, as well as some exclusivity, because I want to be biased in my assessments. I want to be biased for good programmers, for good potential employees, and I want to be biased against poor ones. At the same time, I want to be very inclusive across other factors. And so what I like to do in my assessments is, as much as possible, is to make them authentic. Authenticity is key. If you're assessing something that you're not leveraging in the position that you're using, you're assessing something that you're spending a lot of time and resources assessing something that has no value to you. So think about what it is, and if you're hiring somebody that you want to be a deep expert in file I/O, then maybe that's a good thing, and maybe that bias is very good. On the other hand, if you are excluding somebody because they aren't familiar with particular cultural aspects, that is very bad. So I would just go back to, how can you think creatively to make things authentic?
Liz, go next.
Hey, I'm Liz Tepper. I've been on the hiring side, and when I was at Software for Good, we were really sort of intentional and human-centered with how we did both of our coding exercises, and then on the design side, we did stuff too. And so we would, we're very detailed in offering people, like, here's some options for you. We would give an optional sort of like kickoff question call for people, so they can ask questions before they get started. We gave them time, so you could have up to a week, and we time boxed it to be like, it's 2 hours, don't do any more than 2 hours if you don't want to. And then we would also set up an email box that would send it to a Slack channel, so if people got stuck along the way, we could unblock them, and that was monitored by the team. And then at the end, we would do a 30-minute sort of talk us through stuff, talk us through other questions that came up. I think it's really important to be intentional and sort of human in your approach. And I also feel very strongly in that any free labor is exploitive, including coding exercises. And every candidate that I've ever done, like whether it was like a dev review or design review, I've learned something from it. And so as a company, you're taking back that sort of intellectual property that you've learned from that individual, and they deserve to be paid for it.
All right, as a hot button topic about whether or not candidates should be paid, I saw Chris over there in the back, I guess in the blue shirt. You want to go next after that?
Sorry. You yield?
Thank you. This is a very, I would say, submitting this topic because like for last 5-6 years, I've been thinking about this.
Why didn't you do a mini bar session?
I was like, it is a touchy topic from many perspectives. I've been in the software industry for now 25-30 years, and one thing I noticed, the thing is, software development has evolved a lot since like the days I started. When we used to write the code in late 90s and early 2000s, we used to write 95% of code was our code. We wrote from the scratch.
Mm-hmm.
We hardly had anything called APIs. Like it was like all start in the main and exit. That's all, right?
Mm-hmm.
Literally, that's used to be the key thing. And that's where the coding exercises started from. Like people wanted to know how you write the code because after you leave the company, somebody has to maintain that. Today, I would say 90% of the code is actually open source, like you pull in from libraries.
Mm-hmm.
So it does not really make sense that you focus on the coding exercises. What makes sense is two things. One is that when given a problem, how do you modularize it, right? If you're writing from scratch, you are a bad programmer, right? You have to start looking from how I'm going to compartmentalize this problem, bring in reusable components from open source, what components you are aware of, maybe not aware of everything, but you bring in something, And more importantly, like your component, because now we're talking about microservices and modules, right? How are you going to export your functionality to somebody else's use? So how are you going to define APIs?
Yeah.
So that's, I would say that given a problem, I would ask a developer to define the function APIs for your functionality and the components you would depend on, how you bring it in, how you are going to have that API contract with those that functionality.
So it's more like design and architecture and like conceptual than it is, any syntax and code. Yeah, that's great. Seth, you want to go back to the guy in the blue shirt and Chris after that?
Thank you. A mindset that's been very helpful for me, at least when I've been interviewing, is just that the exercise is probably flawed in some way. So, and that causes a lot of kind of different side effects of how you respond to that, right? Like one is that you put up here is have different exercises or even different modalities of are you taking it home, are you taking it live, whatever. But beyond that, it's understanding that the goal isn't to complete the exercise and have some finished body of work, but the goal is to learn something out of it. So if the candidate is pivoting into something really interesting, it's okay to go down that rabbit hole even though that's not the initial intention. It's okay to leave it very open to how this is implemented. So I'm an iOS engineer, so if someone wants to do something in Swift UI or UIKit or whatever type of framework, sweet, go for it. If you don't know something, it's okay to be oh, this is actually how you do it, or look it up on the internet on the spot, that's fine too. And then lastly, just incrementing the exercise. If I write up a coding exercise and people run into questions over and over, there's probably something wrong with the question.
Yeah.
And so, or the code that I provide that they tap into or anything like that. And so just being open to collaborate and work together to figure out how you can best understand what the candidate has to offer.
Yeah.
Just all kind of boils down to this is probably bad, and so make the best out of a bad situation.
I love that point because we haven't really talked about it from the candidate, the job seeker perspective much, but I like that a lot. I'm going to come into future coding exercises thinking this is probably not as well thought out as they would like, and so maybe there might be some flaws in it and sort of make assumptions based on that. I like that.
Can I talk about that?
Yeah, Seth, what do you think?
Yeah, half the time the interviewer is not going to be trained or really even have any idea what they're looking for. Maybe not at our various meta representatives interviews, but at most of the interviews you'll attend, the interviewer won't know the answers to these questions. So the idea that you're even participating in a well-designed process in the first place might be a bad assumption. So just keep that in mind. If it feels awkward, you might be talking to a person who could not pass the process themselves.
Yeah.
Keep it in mind.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Over here in the flowery shirt.
Hi, I kind of came here because I've only been through one coding exercise as a candidate, and now I'm starting to realize that maybe that's weird and sort of talks to the first question of are they actually necessary?
Yeah.
In a consultancy thing, the one thing that they asked me to do was estimate the size of the room because I'd have to estimate my own hours and how long, estimate how many pennies could fill the room.
Oh, yeah.
Talk through how I would estimate it to get a sense of whether I could actually estimate my own personal time. I can't speak to all of St. Thomas. There are some really programming intensive departments I haven't been on hiring committees for, but I've been on technical search committees where literally we just ask people to talk about business problems they've solved, and they usually just sort of drop a couple of words about technologies, about how they've solved it. And there are people in the room who've done similar work, so they're kind of like, cool, that makes sense that you solved this with that, and we don't really code them that they actually know how to do it because we presume they couldn't have done the story they just told if they didn't.
Yeah.
And, yeah, so that is sort of the experience I've often seen. I have only gone through one coding exercise, and it was for like a big, massive company, remote work, kind of really massive process.
Josh, right behind her in the green.
Hello. My challenge is I do a lot of hiring, but I hire for projects. So it's more a contractor basis, and I do a lot of, can you walk me through your past project? I don't do coding exercises, but my challenge is how do you keep the relationship warm and nice if you don't have a project 3 months from now? And so I find myself reaching out to like 15 people, hey, I'm gonna have a project 4 months from now, are you available? And so those are, I'm just being honest, like those are some of my challenges without bothering you because you're an expert and you're working for 6 months is, where's that velocity and is there a place that I can come back and be like, hey, are you free in 6 months? I have another project. Because I'm mostly in like 30 and 40 person type companies, do a lot of consulting, and they're like, go find someone to do a project. And so those are some of the things, and then it's estimating. And so how do you get the right estimating? How do you find the right billable hours? I find that as a challenge, working with like, hey, what's this project like? I'm like, I think it's 6 months long. So those are the things that I run into challenges with, and I don't have a good answer, and I love feedback on that because I love all my relationships. I want to work with everyone, but it's like, how do you be respectful, try to give them the roadmap when there isn't a roadmap, or there might be. And so those are the things. I don't know.
Okay, I think I would say software, like estimating software projects, is a whole other topic. So I know there have been sessions about it before at Minibar. I think that's something worth talking about, but that's probably not. This is not the right forum for that. Also, I think like there's an underlying assumption that I've made in talking about this most of the time that usually when we're talking about coding exercises, it's usually for full-time employment. But that's not a safe assumption. You know, it could be a contract gig, and I think shorter-term projects is like you're assessing for different stuff than if you're assessing for somebody who's going to work here full-time for, you know, presumably more than 3 or 6 months or a year or whatever. We're close to the end of time. We have a little bit more, but I just want to make sure that we're aware that we're almost at time. I am kind of curious to hear, like, from the hiring manager perspective, if anybody can make a case for or against coding exercises. If you got strong feelings, I'd love to hear him. This guy shot his hand up. You want to have him talk?
So I've done a lot of hiring. I've completely lost faith in coding exercises, but I continue to do them anyway. And I guess one of the reasons I've come out strongly against is for manager hires, nobody does the coding exercise version of, you know, practice managing this team.
Oh, yeah.
So organizations that do a lot of coding exercises know how to hire, but have coding exercises for positions that really matter. They just don't apply that to the individual contributor level.
Yeah, so it's like, how do you assess for people management skills? That's tough. Oh boy. Seth, over here in the purplish shirt.
What?
Purplish?
No.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I'm also from the hiring manager perspective. I'm a little bit more on the pro coding exercises side. I do think there is a way to make it so it is still a human experience. One thing that my company does is we don't have ever a dedicated coding only interview. It's always mixed with also some talking about your past work experiences, situational questions. So it's not just, I'm gonna give you a test and then I'm gonna leave. It's always sandwiched in with other questions as well. I will say we also do situational for people managers, where it is the hypothetical kind of situation and trying to kind of give that coding question environment also for people manager interviews. So I think there is a way to do that as well. I think a key part though is, going back to the bias, is sharing questions in advance, especially going back to what Seth was saying about not every interviewer is trained. Trying to do as much as you can in terms of the training to make sure that the questions people are asking are fair, calling out things that might be biased ahead of just signing up someone to interview for the first time and never giving them that sort of training.
All right, so we have like 1 or 2 minutes left. So if you have like one more thing that you really want to say, Dan in the gray hat.
So I'm going to come out for the pro side of this. I've been hiring out recently, and it's taken a while to get the process right. But the first thing I say is, if it's truly a coding exercise, don't make it a test. So when I say that to a candidate, I think that disarms some of it, because if it's, we've talked about coding exercise as the topic here. So if it's an exercise, make sure it's an exercise and not a test. So if it's a test, call it a test. So if there's something that needs to be tested, test it. But what I like about the exercise is that it is more of a live exercise, it is more of a pair. But what I'm looking for is to see how they think through the problem and talk through it, and have people on my team there. Because I want to see how they interact with the code, but I also want to see how they talk through it, which is not easy to do, but it also lets them have access to the team to ask questions. So anyway, I think exercise is a great word, but just make sure it's an exercise, not a test. Yeah,
I mean, one of the things that I've seen is that, like, it takes time and energy to do a good job. Like, there's no magic pill. Like, if you're throwing a code exercise over the wall and you're not giving candidates opportunities to make sure they're on the right track and to talk through like the problem and how they're thinking about it, it's like it's a recipe for a bad time. And you're probably doing that because you don't have a lot of time to spend, but you need to spend the time. There's no way around spending the time to do a good job. Any last hot button, you want to just really quickly shout something out? If not, okay. Last one.
I'll just as a last quick tangent. If you are going to make candidates go through a whole lot of effort and time and things like that, make sure that by the end of it, you can have like a yes or no answer from it. Like, I, on both sides, have seen people on my team be like, oh, I'm not sure, maybe we should like interview them again or something like that.
No, thank you.
As a candidate, like if you're gonna take a week or two beyond when I do like the main body of interviews, like I'm gonna go work somewhere else.
Yeah.
Like it just is gonna be the case. So make sure you understand what you're trying to learn out of it, like synthesize that and then like do something with that information right away.
Yeah, I love it. All right, well, everybody, thank you so much again for coming. I appreciate your perspectives. This is a topic that's important and I'm passionate about. I'm sure many of you are passionate about too. Again, we've got panel discussions coming up in July and August. You can take the coding exercise survey, which would be awesome, and I'll share the results in a blog post later. And then you can find me on Twitter at Experimat, and I run Invisible Network. I'll be around the rest of the day, so if you want to talk about this some more, like just find me and we'll talk. Thanks. Thank you.